Welcome to It's a Controls Problem, where we do precision guesswork based upon unreliable data given to us by those of questionable knowledge. I'm your host, Charles Johnson. Yeah, so today's kind of an interesting topic, I think. It could be a little controversial to some people, but all in all, I think it's really important to understand the investment that you need to have into yourself in the controls industry. So I think one of the things that I kind of want to talk about here is the reason why I think you need to do that. And is actually, as a matter of fact, you and I were part of a conference where I mentioned that same thing. And anyone that I mentor in the community, I tell them that exact same thing. And there are a few reasons why. If you don't work for a company that has endless trunks of money, so like if you're not working for like a Johnson or a Siemens, those companies can send you, off to the factory for training for weeks on end because that's their process. That's how large they are. But if you are a smaller, outfit, a mom and pop shop, two men in a truck, or just, let's say, you're just a controls vendor that's just, on a wing. Yeah. And it's important to understand that training becomes few and far between. The average cost of, for a company to train someone, let's say just for Niagara training, right? Let's say that is a total of anywhere between, let's say, $5 to $10,000 a person. And that seems strange, but if you think about it, it could be even more on the higher side, closer to the 10. And here's why. Number one, you have to pay for the training, and that can be anywhere between, let's say, $2,300 to $3,300, or even $35, depending upon the person or the vendor, really. Then that person is out for that week. And you're still paying them a weekly salary, so that's there. If it's not a virtual training, and you have to send them somewhere, well, then guess what? That's going to cost a plane ticket. It's going to cost hotel. It's going to cost food. So, in the grand scheme of things, training can get very costly. And what makes it difficult for vendors or controls contractors to invest immediately into someone is the fact that they can just up and leave. Like, okay, great. I got my training here. Thank you. I will go find someone else to make more money, because people equate certifications to more money. And of course they should. And so for me, what I see a lot of, when I see a lot of successful controls contractors, they have, some internal training that they do, but realistically, they're not going to want to invest in you if you aren't really doing anything to better yourself. Training is only as good as what you make of it. So like, if you have things like Smart Buildings Academy or Udemy or, a few other things like that, that training is only good if you want to use it. If you don't want to use it, then it's worthless. More importantly, I think that, it shows initiative from a controls contractor. Like, wow, this kid's got some spunk. He's a self-motivator. He's trying to learn some things on the fly. And, maybe it's time that we show that interest back in them. And, there are going to be some people that I think they're like, well, a company should just invest in you immediately. Yes and no. But, the upfront capital they may not have right away. So they may take a little bit to build, that fund up for that.
I think there's something to be said as well about, the inner confidence that comes along with completing certifications and training courses, and how much more that confidence can help you in communicating yourself to other people, and how well that is recepted by them. Because there is a difference when you feel confident about yourself, other people feel confident in your ability.
Yes, absolutely. I'll give an example. There was a company I was working for, and I won't say in what area or whatnot. But what ended up happening is we had a fair amount of turnover, and we hired a bunch of new people to start working for us. Um, Unfortunately, a lot of them did not have experience at all. And so, like, I remember, I went to a job site and, I was told, like, hey, just go out, show them a few things and, see where they are, on this road. And, like, when I went out there, I was like, all right, cool. I'm like, well, hey, tell me if that damper on the VAV is open or closed. And they're like, what's a damper? And I'm like, well, hold on, what? And they're like, yeah, they're like, we've only been here for like 2 weeks. I'm like, and what have people showed you? They're like, not really much. We've just been carrying ladders for other people. And I was like, oh, okay now. Well, we're gonna change that right now. Um, we're gonna get you, just kind of get you in there. And so so I started taking some of my own time, driving to some job sites at night, because we were working in a school district. So we had to do a lot of work at night. And so, like, while I was doing my regular job during the day, I was working, 5 or 6 hours at night, working with them, trying to get them focused. And so at some point I was like, hey, guys, like, why don't you come in, to the office on a Saturday? Look, I'll buy breakfast. I'll even buy lunch for everyone. Obviously, like, I'm not paying you, but like, if you want to come in, like, let's have a session on some things and you can learn. And so, like, after like 4 hours of it, someone was like, hey, are we getting paid for this? And while I'm not disagreeing with them, and it was a valid question, I was like, well, I'm not getting paid for this. This is kind of, I'm taking my time to help, teach you things that, the company may not necessarily be able to teach you all in an 8-hour day. And like three of them like got up and left. They're like, well, if we're not getting paid for it, it doesn't matter. I'm like, aha. And while, some trainings on your own, like learning controls from the ground up, most people come in with no experience. And so how do you gain that experience? Well, you have to, you got to put in the work. And some of the dinosaurs of the field, they may not necessarily want to teach you because you're just a young buck, and especially nowadays, like when you have or we're in what, Gen Z now, right? I think that's what it is. There are some people that feel like the younger generation, they're more entitled and this, that, and the other. So some people want to keep things close to their chest, especially in the controls industry, because they think that while knowledge is power, if someone else doesn't have that knowledge, you do. But in the grand scheme of things, we need to make sure that everyone else has that knowledge as well, because one day you're not going to be here. When I started, when I was a young warthog, the big thing was, learning things on my own. Like, I read books on my own time. I took programs home. I started making things on my own. I started to once I got somewhere and I got stuck, then I would ask some questions. But before that, I took some time to do things on my own. That's why I became certified in so many different controls products, because I had to do it on my own. And it's made me more marketable. Now, obviously, I found a real home, with the company that I'm currently employed in, and very happy. But the thing was, I don't know if I could have gotten where I am had I not taken the time to invest things in myself to show companies that I was a motivator. How about you?
Right. It's same thing, because I'm a college dropout, and I just went to work for my dad, and I started learning there. I learned a lot from him firsthand, just doing stuff. When I decided that it was time for me to elevate beyond where I felt plateaued, it was going out and finding those types of courses that just directly related to what I wanted to learn to do better at the job that I was doing.
Yeah, I think I think that's a very good point too. Um, we all have our own path, right? Like in how we get there. Um, one thing that I thought was really important for me eventually in my career was to become a certified N4 developer. Um, I want to be able to talk to other software engineers and whatnot who are just getting into especially getting into the world of Niagara, and then their goal is eventually to become a developer. So I can actually talk both sides of that.
That's an important part of that, continuing your own education in whatever field you're trying to, or discipline you're trying to improve yourself at, is also how to communicate with other people in that field. You can get more things done and more efficiently, more effectively when you know what to talk about.
Absolutely. All right, so we have a special guest here today, the man, the myth, the legend, Phil Zito. Phil Zito is, as some of you may know or may not know, he is the owner and creator of Smart Buildings Academy. I believe Phil also wrote a book. I think it's Building Automation Systems from A to Z. I think that's How to Survive a World Full of BAS. I know it's been a while since I think I've seen that book, but I believe that's the book you wrote. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Welcome, Phil, to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. Yeah, I definitely I wrote the book. I don't know if I want to take ownership of the book after my co-owner, who happens to be my wife, pointed out how many grammar mistakes are in the book. But I mean, as you'll probably hear from this podcast, there's not much of a filter between my brain and my mouth, and apparently not between my brain and my fingers as well. So, yeah.
Well, you're in good company there.
There you go.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, you.
But no, I really, it's an honor to have you here. You and I spoke very briefly at Niagara Summit. I've spoken to some of your other people, a former employee, John Henderson, and then I am meeting with, I think it's Mike McGuire.
Yeah.
I think I'm meeting with him at AHR. We're going to discuss some potential opportunities, to push people to Smart Buildings Academy. But I tell you what, I'd like to. I would just like to say, when we were talking about building yourself up, I always say that I think it's important for people in controls to be a self-starter because, one's trainings can be expensive to start. And you may not have that opportunity right away. And so investing in yourself means that companies will also invest in you. And, I think you have a great bridge that can help people, shore up your those gaps in education. So I tell you what, how did you, I guess the first question is, how did you come up with the idea of Smart Buildings Academy?
So it wasn't some stroke of genius. It actually was driven by immaturity, if I'm completely transparent with you. So back up all the way to 2007. I exited the military, was completely inexperienced, and ended up memorizing what HVAC is off of Wikipedia. This was like before even YouTube was really big. And I passed a interview with Orion International to get hired into building automation. And then they put me in as a programmer. I had no freaking clue what I was doing. Got let go like 6 months later because I was kind of clueless. Called all around the U.S. to get a job at an Allerton dealer in Chicago, and really like started reading and studying constantly, reading the Honeywell Gray Manual, which they used to give you at Allerton training back in the day, and started reading train controls engineering manuals because I was like, I've got two little kids. My wife doesn't work. I got to figure something out because I need to be indispensable and make sure that I know everything. So that created this lifelong kind of learning thing. But then around 2012, I've always had a little bit of ego. It's is what it is. So I was like, man, I got to do something. I'm not gonna progress in this field fast enough if I just keep moving up the ladder. So I started looking at side businesses. I started looking at internet businesses, which were really popular blogs. And my wife was like, "You should write a blog. You're already writing one for Johnson Controls, so you should write one." So I started writing a blog. Started going and joining like how to write blog courses, how to podcast courses, because then podcasts were becoming popular. And it was like a creative outlet, 60% of it, and 40% of it was me trying to figure out how to make more money. Turned out I wasn't terrible at blogging and communicating to people, which when you're in a environment of zero people doing it, it's pretty easy to be number one. So I had that kind of first mover advantage. The blog, I was like, oh, let's turn this into a book. I wrote a book. Funny enough, I would record the book on my way to work, send the recording over to India, have them transcribe it. And then I had someone typeface it off Fiverr. And then I put it on Amazon via their like online book community thing. The book turned into videos. People were like, hey, this is raw and real, and you teach halfway decent. So why don't you create courses? So I created courses. Courses turned into basically a full-time gig in November 2017 due to kind of some disagreements between my former employer and I. And then fast forward 2020, we ran the COVID special, which was I've always had a soft spot for people. And I thought, man, all these people are getting let go. If I could give them some skills. So I offered access to our programming, our install, our design, or our one of our other courses, 4 courses for $20. They could have that course for 2 months. And my goal with that was, man, this will help people train and like get a job in BAS. That got me the attention of some big companies, which then basically necessitated me hiring employees. And, you know, the rest is history. Now we're the largest training provider for building automation. But I mean, it was never this glorious plan, Charles and Matthew. It was basically just making it up as I go, trying to do what I thought I needed when I was a tech and couldn't find, and really trying to dial in on kind of the core knowledge that people need to have in order to be successful in building automation.
I think that's really great. Like, a lot of Matthew has taken some of my classes, and, I continuously tell people that controls was always like, and still is for the most part, like a figure it out kind of, industry. And so like, how well can you swim? And come to find out most people are just barely treading water. And with that, like, I'm not saying that's correct, but I mean, it's how we all learned growing up. And, and even the dinosaurs of the industry or of companies, they're like, yeah, he'll figure it out. It's kind of how it's been. But like, I think I think a lot of that is, obviously there's some times where people have right place, right time. And especially when something isn't there and you create that, which is great. And BAS for me, it's a hodgepodge, right? Because as you know, we need to learn the mechanical side. So we have to understand how our equipment works. And then in order to make sure that we don't hurt ourselves out in the field, we need to understand the electrical side to make sure that we don't let the smoke out of ourselves or the controllers that we install. And then, now more importantly, we're dealing with the IT side of things. And especially as we go, into like digital twins and, all that other stuff, it's a lot to take in. Like you have to wear so many different hats. So, thank you, for you being, a pioneer in that movement to get people to understand, like, hey, we need people. And I believe the statistic is still true that for every one person that enters the industry, 5 leave. So, it definitely, all companies are always looking for good people. And even if they aren't good, good right now, can we make them good? That's really the big thing there. But a couple, some questions I have in mind. One, especially in an evolving field like HVAC and controls, what are some of the biggest advancements in technology or techniques that have emerged recently, and how can continued education help technicians stay ahead of the curve?
That's a tough one. I encourage people whenever they look at a new technology to look at where it's actually deployed, and if that deployment was purchased at negative margin, meaning the job was won at negative margin or was won with marketing dollars. Because still to this day, there's a lot of push for analytics, a lot of push for technology. And unfortunately, I've been wrong on pretty much all of my guesses of when technology was going to evolve. So I mean, if I were someone are we talking someone new to the industry trying to advance, or are we talking someone already in?
Let's say someone coming into the industry.
Okay, someone coming in, I wouldn't even worry about technology. Honestly, what I would worry about is your ability to think logically. I think almost any concept in building automation, because there's the 3 legs, as you so astutely said, of the building automation tabletop, which are HVAC, electrical, and IT. But when you think about HVAC, when you think about electrical, when you think about IT, if you could think about it from a logical standpoint, if you can get like procedural thinking in your mind, and what I mean by that is think about anything in life. I go and just got done smoking a bunch of brisket on the smoker. And I'm trying to lose weight. So, okay, I go and I eat a bunch of brisket because it's really good. And that's an input to my system. The process inside my body is like, hey, Phil, you ate way too many calories. We're storing this all on your belly. You're going to get even fatter. I'm like, all right, cool. So then the output is I gain weight and I gain inches in my belly, right? That's a input, process, output. Everything that you need to know in building automation, every problem you will ever run into in building automation and just in life in general can be summed down to input, process, output. So let's take someone brand new coming into the field. They need to learn HVAC and they're like, I don't understand this HVAC stuff. It's super complicated. All right. Well, what are we trying to do? We're trying to change temperatures or change humidity. So we're trying to change something, or we're trying to increase something or decrease something. Well, in order to do that, we have an input, right, which is going to be that thing we're trying to change or adjust. We have a process that might be cooling, that might be heating, that might be dehumidification. And then we have an output, right? That may be a humidifier, a dehumidifier, a decusant wheel, cooling coil, etc. So I think if new folks can start to think whenever they run into a problem, whenever they're trying to learn something, what am I trying to achieve? What's the output I want? What process do I need to do to get to that output? And then what inputs are going to go into that process? Does that make sense? Or is that like too kind of ethereal and high level? You want something like more practical?
No, I think that's actually a great analogy because that's something that anyone can understand, right? I mean, even not having any HVAC knowledge whatsoever, like, okay, I did this, so something needs to happen.
Yeah.
And so
Or
I really
something's
like,
not happening.
yeah. Yeah, I the way I kind of at first would mentor people, I would tell people like think of HVAC as like nothing but exchanging heat from one place to another, right?
You can abstract that heat example to electrical.
Yep.
The transfer of power and, electrical being a key concept. You can abstract that to IT, the transfer of data. Like so often you'll see people trying to figure out why their devices can't communicate with another device. Okay, well, what are the inputs? It's coming from a device via what? Either wireless or an Ethernet cable. Okay, have I checked that the wireless and Ethernet cable are on? Have I checked that my device is good? Okay, great. Well, what's the process? Well, it's transferring, and I know this is where that like core knowledge comes in. You have to understand networking. You have to understand HVAC. Like you have to have a basic theory knowledge of things, and that's what I see as lacking from a lot of people in this industry. So I've yet to meet someone, and I'll come back to this IT analogy in a second, but just segueing, I've yet to meet someone who totally effed up a job because they didn't understand how to use the software, or like they didn't understand where to go to click on something. It's usually like, hey, I'm in, the Midwest, it's negative 40 degrees out, and I'm inexperienced, and I didn't know that I need my preheat to fail open, or I need to sequence something a certain way to keep from icing coils, or, something like that. It's usually not tools, but if you look at how we train as an industry, it's almost all we're going to send you to learn the software. We're going to learn the tool, and just hopefully you pick up the theory and the why out in the field.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I think you've got a lot of you've got a lot of people new coming in that kind of like, I want it now, like and they get really frustrated because like, man, I should be knowing this. Like, no, it's going to take a while. All right, well, that was great for new. Do you have what about maybe for people who are deeply embedded? What are some of the things that they could do to stay ahead of the curve?
I mean, I would learn systems as far as so you can learn your HVAC systems as a new person. And that's just, what is this? How does it work? What should it do? And then you can learn your systems as an experienced person. Okay, where can I, rob some airflow? Where can I rob some BTUs because I have an undersized system? Well, how could I potentially look at the orientation of this building, pre-cool part of the building, knowing how the heat load is going to hit the building during the day, and little strategies like that, things that you're modifying and approaching things just based on understanding thermodynamics, heat transfer, stuff like that. I would also say really dive into the core IT concepts. And nothing that's rolling out from an IT perspective is hyper advanced. I mean, IP rings have been in industrial since the early 2000s. So like the Cisco MRP rings, stuff like that. So going and learning IP addressing, subnetting, routing, really learning. I like to tell people from a networking perspective, if you know the OSI model and you understand what happens across the OSI model, you're going to be able to figure out most network issues. Understanding applications, so understanding how software works, like still is interesting to me with Niagara being so prevalent, how many people don't understand like what is a platform, what is the Java runtime engine, like what's actually happening, what's a firmware, what's a DLL, what's a driver, what's a SDK, all these kind of things that go into a platform that they use every day. So understanding that. Also, the cybersecurity aspect of things. Just understanding basic cyber hygiene, things like changing passwords, using unique usernames, two-factor authentication, understanding certificating, especially with BACnet SE requiring certificating, understanding IDS. Like one of the things we would always do when we would put in a server back in the early 2000s is you turn off the firewall. That way you could get it to communicate. Wasn't really a big deal. Because not a lot of us understood port security, and you really didn't need to know port security. So those are, it's once again, I would just go and really understand this is the technical side. On the business side of things, understand how your business makes money. The most valuable technicians, the ones who aren't going to get replaced if things turn down at any point in time, and economy could still turn down, are the ones who can go into a customer site, identify potential retrofit opportunities, have a value-based conversation with the customer of, you're complaining about this? Well, we can do this. And then turning that into revenue. That is a very valuable skill. I've had many free lunches from salespeople because I basically was the reason they made their number. And that is a skill that will keep you while everyone else is getting let go.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I agree with everything you say. I always tell people also become someone's trusted advisor too. Sure, they may not give you that job right now, but if you steer them and if you never steer them wrong, eventually they're going to come back to you. And with that, I think I think what you said there, being able to find and pinpoint where to generate the revenue on a business side, a lot of people don't understand.
It's as hard as people think it is.
People overcomplicate things. And so, like when you said, people don't understand, like when they don't understand, Java runtime and all that, it does kind of blow me away, especially like when I'll talk to some people who've had a fair, who've been deeply rooted in the system, and, they're like, well, how do I do that? I'm like, what? Like, oh, okay. You'll get people who will just who kind of know enough to be dangerous. But I think another question I have for you, Phil, is beyond technical skills. So, having the fundamentals. How does continued education contribute to an HVAC technician's problem-solving abilities and critical thinking? And what other soft skills are valuable to BAS roles? I know we just talked a little bit about that, but is there anything else we can add?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. So constantly evolving in that space, and just from my own awareness. I mean, I was pretty headstrong, and I would speak with confidence about things I did not have competence in. And looking back, really, there's this book. It's called How to Win Friends and Influence People, by Dale Carnegie, and it's pretty old. It's like 1920s. So if you can get back past the olden references, it has a lot of really good information. The core of it is be curious and be more interested in others than you're interested in them being interested in you. So a genuine curiosity, active listening, this is something on a daily basis I try to be good at, and most of the time fail miserably, but improving slowly. And one of the things I would say is active listening. And then one of the things that I think has made our business successful, and I've seen other businesses be successful from, is being someone who consumes knowledge from a variety of different sources. And by doing that, you start to connect logic dots that you wouldn't otherwise. And so let me make this kind of tangible for your audience. So for example, the most common way of explaining a PID loop is cruise control on a car. So basically the concept is you set a set point and then the car goes and maintains that. So in order to make that analogy work, though, at some point, someone knew something about cars, and then they were able to say, you know what, this is kind of like cruise control. This PID loop is kind of like cruise control. As a matter of fact, it probably has a PI engine inside the car that is driving a proportional and integral response to a setting and a process variable. And then they were able to make that connection, and thus you have the graphic of the car that everyone uses to teach PID loops. But that would have never happened if someone hadn't been interested in cars. And so I wonder how many opportunities we miss out on because we don't have a curiosity about, like, why do our customers' buildings do what they do? Why does a hospital care about temperature? Well, if you dig into it, a lot of them get their funding based on patient surveys. So what happens, a patient's in a patient room, they complete a survey, and then their Medicare, Medicaid funding comes based on patient satisfaction scores, of which temperature, lighting, ambiance are some of the questions that are asked. So if you don't maintain temperature, it's quite possible that the patient will leave a bad satisfaction score, which then will lead to reduced reimbursements. But you wouldn't know that if you didn't dig into how a hospital makes their money and how their business works. So a genuine curiosity about the vertical markets you serve, about the way your business does business. I kick myself that I didn't spend more time learning how my previous employers did their project processes and things, because it would have given me different insight. I kind of just accepted, like, oh, this is how they do projects, but I didn't dig into the why. And by not doing that, I missed out on, there's a reason why these companies are billion-dollar companies. They figured something out, and that would have expanded my thinking and my ability to, advise customers on, like, hey, have you thought about doing it this way? But because I wasn't curious, I missed out on that learning opportunity.
Oh yeah, I was just going to mention along those lines of self-awareness is something that I find very important, especially if you're in a leadership role. It's something you should be constantly practicing and stopping even before you engage, especially if a topic can become emotional, that you're really aware of how that situation can affect you, and then how you communicate to other people to solve that problem. So self-awareness, I would stack on top of that, is a very important thing to always stay on top of, because you yourself as a human being is always evolving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I really liked your talk into curiosity. As a matter of fact, I contribute curiosity on my side as well. One of the things that I like to talk about with people is being controls agnostic. So not necessarily caring what product you're using, rather than do you know how this works? Like can you make it work? And so I think that it's great, and active listening is super important, because you'll know when you meet people who just want to they already have something to say, right? So like that they're sitting there just waiting to talk, and I'm like, you're not really hearing what I'm saying, but okay. And you let those people talk, eventually it shows itself of who really wants to pay attention versus who doesn't. So I think you had some great points. But another question I have for you, Phil, is like let's like look ahead into what we see for some of potentially the emerging trends or challenges that the industry has now. What do
Hmm.
you think is going to demand the most attention from technicians in terms of continued education and professional development?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I've been wrong with almost every guesstimate I've come up with. So, uh, uh, I'll tell you what keeps me up at night as a training company is how soon are technicians going to be replaced by robots? How soon are programmers and designers going to be replaced by AI? Because I don't think we appreciate it. And I think we get into our own kind of confirmation bias circles of like, no one could ever do what a technician does. This robot can barely do this right now. And it's like, yeah, ChatGPT could barely write a sentence 2 years ago, and now it's doing, postgraduate level math and stuff. And so one of the areas that I am actively watching are robotics, because as we continue to drive up the minimum wage, as we continue to have demands from employees of you've got to pay me 160 grand because there's no techs out here. Eventually, there is going to be a point at which people are like, that's fine. I'll just replace you with a robot. And people go, well, robot can't do everything. I'm like, you have to realize there is a finite amount of ways anything can be done. It's not infinite. So there is not no matter what job site you put me on, there is not infinite ways a thermostat can be installed or a controller can be programmed. There is a finite amount of ways. And they know NVIDIA is building, I think it's NVIDIA, it might be another company, is building a way to train robots using virtual worlds. So it creates a virtual 3D world, and then the robot learns on the virtual 3D world. So what happens when companies realize that they can buy a $20,000 robot, train it on a virtual world, and have it do install? I think the only thing that will hold that back is lobbyists and unions, probably. Because they have such an influence on law, and they'll find ways to regulate that, maybe require a person to be there with the robot. But that is like long term. And then short term, I always said if I had $100 million, I would go and train an AI agent, on every building automation software and how to read sequences. And then with those sequences, how to correlate those sequences to logic blocks or designs. And then I would create an AI agent that you have all the software installed on your desktop. You feed it the sequence of operations, it scans it, and then it automatically opens the executable for GFX or web controller or whatever, and writes the program, or it writes the design. So I think designers and programmers are going to be the first jobs to go. And then I think technicians will follow that. I don't know what the timeframes are, but so if I'm like, I'm a tech, what do? I think this is where becoming multi-layered skill is really important. I think service will be the last thing to go. So understanding how to troubleshoot and problem solve, understanding how to think through unique solutions, and also really understand how to use AI, how to use, I don't think ChatGPT is the best anymore. If I remember reading, like Grok 3 is going to be way more better. I know that's horrible English, horrible grammar. I told you the grammar is going to come up. This is what you can get if you go buy a copy of A to Z on Amazon. You yourself too can experience the wonderful world of Phil's grammar. But in all seriousness,
yourself too can get way much better.
Yes, right. Exactly. It's like a drunken 2-year-old trying to speak. So what I'm referencing is, if you've never seen it, the Will Ferrell skit where he has his toddler come up and demand rent. Not
where's the rent?
yes,
Pay now.
most
From
of the
collegehumor.com.
yes, most of what is said in that is probably not appropriate for this podcast, but it is a hilarious little skit.
Hey, don't talk to me like that. I'm a grown man.
Yes. So anywho, I probably wasn't the answer you were looking for, but that's the world according to me. That's what keeps me up thinking. Because if the technicians and the programmers go away, who do I train?
Right. I think that's a really it's a really great point. We actually have another episode where we discuss AI quite a bit. And a couple of us were talking about human intuition, and I think that some of that I don't know if AI can truly mimic. But I do co-sign on that. There's probably, that there is a finite amount of way. Like, you can only, installing a controller for sure. Right. Like, okay, well, you either do it this way or you can do it this way or you can do it this way. I don't know if there's I don't know if there's an innovative way to do some kind of install. But, one thing I kind of think is hilarious on it is, when integration really became, I guess it was on the cusp, and people were like, in 20 years, and this was like, maybe even the early 2000s, or even just slightly before, but like, they're like, oh man, everything's just going to be 2 wires and you're not going to need anything else. And, and that's just going to take away controls. And well, 30 years later, we're still here. I think AI, people need to embrace it, and help make themselves right now, I think smarter. And I think an analogy would be like a carpenter, right? Like a carpenter knows how to build something with his bare hands with hand tools, but that doesn't make him a less skilled carpenter with power tools. As a matter of fact, it can make him even more skilled now, because now he can produce something in less than half the time as he did just, with a regular handsaw. I think those are really great things. What kind of keeps me up at night is ChatGPT. Like, some people rely on it so much where they don't know how to do it. And I think that's really important to do too, is knowing how to do it versus then getting someone else to do it are two different things.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because it's like, I mean, if we go back to your comment on intuition, I don't know if I necessarily agree, because intuition, where does it come from? Is it just a set of inputs, biological, chemical, and learned, that then can be calculated out, mapped out, and stimulated and simulated? I don't know. Maybe. So maybe intuition is not really this big thing we think. But going back to your learning, I mean, that's why Neuralink is fascinating. When you hear Elon Musk talk about the data compute speed of speech and how like lossy speech is and how little data is actually communicated, and what will that look like when we have direct neural interfaces? I don't know. Or maybe an AI agent sits on a controller and dynamically adjusts things based on inputs. Maybe programming. This is an interesting topic, and I haven't heard people talk about it, but I'm sure way smarter people than I are thinking about it, which is like dynamic programs. And I'm not talking about dynamic programs in the sense of dynamic variables, which you already have in like some of the central plant control solutions that are out there in the market, where they'll dynamically adjust set points. I'm talking like dynamic code changes. So as something fails or becomes degraded, the sequencing changes. I don't know if that would even be applicable, to be honest, because mechanical systems are pretty static. But for whole integrated systems, going back to what you said about integration, one thing that I wonder about, and I thought would happen when AI came out, but it didn't, and it might not due to us encrypting data now with like BACnet SC, is the ability of AI to analyze protocol streams, and then through like large language models and cognitive logic functionings and all that fun, fancy stuff that I am far from an expert on, that it would go and be able to identify patterns and say, this is a XYZ controller with this. Because that was always the problem with analytics. Yeah. Well, yeah, I thought that would happen. I thought integration would actually be handled by like some AI middleware that would do data normalization and shaping just in time. Like everything would kind of feed in and it'd be like, oh, this is this and this. And then it would push up to like some master visualization layer. And we would know, because like at the end of the day, all of this stuff is speaking basically the same.
That's, before I ask another question,
Sure.
I just thought about that. Like wondering if, I mean, my house is a controls museum from, having, old host 8000 stuff, and even old like Altivis, it's from DMS and Robert Shaw, or I mean, well, DMS was from Robert Shaw, but like, that'd be interesting to set that up and maybe even try to put it on like Wireshark and then see if AI can help, digest those packets and then seeing I'm wondering if you could just feed it data like that. Like this is a communicating, microzone 8, microzone 2, along with and then here's like a PEM controller and then like maybe after a while put them together and see if it can, man, that is, oh man, now now the gears are turning.
That was the whole, like, that's what I'm talking about earlier about getting a bunch of different, this is why people should read constantly and be trying to expose themselves. And I'm far from good at this. I try to be good about reading and consuming information, but I'm not what I believe I should be. And, but like going and, thinking about different ways of doing things. Because this is what I thought was going to happen with Node-RED. Node-RED would become this, because it has a BACnet module. For those who don't know, Node-RED's a graphical programming tool for IoT devices. And I thought, oh man, wouldn't that be cool? Like it consumes BACnet. You're able, because the problem in my experience with BAS and what's holding us back is everyone has their own programming tool. And there's no APIs into them. So, I can appreciate what that person was trying to do by doing an API into Wiresheet and being able to kind of like be able to write into any JACE or work or station that's sitting out there that has a Wiresheet. But that, in my opinion, is what is going to keep our industry from really expanding and becoming integrated. Because I'll tell you, like, brief segue, the hardest thing for us at Smart Buildings Academy has been getting product from the OEMs. Mm-hmm. And it's really fascinating to me. I completely respect their need to protect their channel, because they don't want to just like give us product and then anyone be able to be trained and then their channel be degraded because anyone can now go out and install their product. So I respect that. That's one of the first things that gets put in a contract when we work with an OEM is like, how do we protect your channel? But on the, well, I mean, think about it. Mm-hmm. They work so hard to develop these dealers and contractors in these markets, and it's often done under like a limitation of contractors that'll be in the market or an exclusivity agreement or something like that. Depends on the OEM. And then like two chucks in a truck can come and learn and then go start servicing an installed base that contractors were depending on to raise their margins up. That's not good. And so that's the main concern we'll hear. And we'll be like, yeah, of course, we're not going to go sell it to anyone because I totally understand your need to have channel control. But you contrast that to the IT market, and anyone can become a Microsoft BI trainer. Mm-hmm. Anyone can train on visual. They want as many people out there as possible training on these platforms, because the more people who are trained on it, the more people are going to use it. So it's interesting to me. People complain that owners don't use their BAS, and you'll hear all this BS about, well, they're just not as smart as techs or blah 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 blah. And it's a bunch of like way to make ourselves feel better about the fact that we just suck at training owners as an industry.
Yep.
But if we like, OEMs should make their training freely available to their owners, because the more they know how to use, and actually they shouldn't do that, because I want to sell to owners. So OEMs, don't go do that. That's a horrible idea. But in all seriousness, an owner who's trained, and we see a ton of owners right now coming to us for training. An owner who's trained is going to use the system, and the system they use, it's like, I have this dream to own a Toyota Tacoma. I own a Honda Odyssey. I can afford a Toyota Tacoma, but for me, like, my daughter tells me it's a woman truck, but whatever. For me, it's an ideal truck. It's small, but it can go off road, and I live in the mountains. So like, I see Tacomas. I think about Tacomas. The next vehicle I'm going to buy is going to be a Tacoma. If I was a owner and I'm using XYZ product all the time, I know XYZ product, guess what product I'm probably going to show preference to in a bid response? And I know you're not supposed to show preference, but yeah, let's be real. They're going to show preference to the product they know how to use.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So it's a bewildering world to me and I know I went on this whole diatribe, and we started at, vendors all having different programming software, but I just think that might be the great equalizer, as you very well hit on, Charles, with AI and it being able to kind of be the translator. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
That, it is interesting that when you mention that OEMs or some OEMs want to protect that. And I think that's interesting. I definitely understand that logic. I'm a person of, let as many people be educated as possible, because everyone can make money somehow. So with your classes, and I'll be honest, I'm not really familiar with a lot of them. Sure. What would you think right now if I were someone, let's say, who had maybe like 1 to 2 years of experience? Sure. Let's say, what do you think, like, of all that you provide? Yeah. What do you think would be one of the core classes that they should take from you? And let's say they have no Niagara experience, right? Let's say they just did nothing but train, and that's all they know. But now they kind of are like, all right, well, I want to go out there. Let's look at Smart Buildings Academy. What do you think one of those classes would be?
Okay, so are they paying for it themselves, or are their employers paying for it?
Let's say they're paying for it.
If they're paying for it themselves, I honestly would tell them, go on the podcast and use the podcast archives.
Okay.
Our prices, they're on par with pretty much all the OEM training class costs, and the average person can't pay out of pocket for something like that. Okay. So quite frankly, it really depends on how fast you want to learn, how much research you want to do. Because our niche is taking people who are new to the industry and rapidly making them job chargeable. We're talking 80% job chargeable out of someone who was working at a gas station 4 weeks before, or working as a hotel lobby clerk 4 weeks before, and they're 80% applied on a job in 4 weeks. So that's one of our like niches. And our other niche specialty is doing skill assessments to identify gaps and then to close those for very tactical skills. Like, you need to know how to estimate, you need to know how to design, you need to know how to troubleshoot. For the individual, we offer so many guides, mini courses, 477 podcast episodes. Like, do that stuff first. Put yourself through the skill assessment, figure out where your gaps are. And, that is a great way to do it on your own. I mean,
Okay.
yeah, that's my 2 cents. Probably not going to make me more money, but I mean, at the end of the day, I want to be real with people. Now, if they want to get in the industry, like being straight up, you can go dump 30 grand on a 2-year or 4-year trade school, and you're going to take our skill assessment and score no different than someone who walked in from an auto mechanic job or who, maybe was doing IT networking. I'm sorry, it's probably going to offend the trade schools out there, but y'all are still using a person's whose name I won't mention, its curriculum from 1990. And I know because I go to y'all's websites, the stuff doesn't work. If it did work, then why do we have a skill shortage? Like, if what the industry was doing worked, why is my company exploding? Why are we able to train people up to 80% job chargeable in 4 weeks when no one else was able to do that before? This is the ego, arrogant side of me coming out.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I can say that with confidence because we've done it so much.
Right. It's based on the output that you've actually seen work.
Yeah, Matthew, it's not me and so I say that with hopes that people will have a curiosity and they'll be like, maybe there's something there. Maybe we should rethink training. Maybe the fact that almost any product class that you go to uses the exact same. This is a rooftop with an air-cooled chiller with 2 circ pumps. Okay, we're going to go through and we're going to learn how to create the user, and then we're going to map in these imaginary controllers, and we're going to write this program for this this air-cooled chiller with these 2 pumps. And then as soon as you get out in the field, but wait, this one has a decoupler. Oh wait, this one has a mixing valve, but it's GPM and BTUs and pressure at the same time. Like, what do I do? Which process variable takes lead? Oh gosh, we're closing down and shutting down our chiller on low flow because they're all fighting each other. No one's teaching that but us.
Yeah. That is a very tough, it's a very tough thing, especially, when you only have, effectively 4 days.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
To teach someone them, and obviously the 5th day is normally a test date. But
Yep.
Matthew, do you have another question for Phil?
Regarding around what we've just been talking about. So rewind, and let's say the person that wants to take some courses with you is in a fledgling company or a company that's looking to aggressively grow their knowledge and their ability to serve the BAS industry. What are some things that they could take to their boss and are convincing arguments for them to consider courses like yours?
Does your boss want an 8x ROI on training costs while paying equivalently the same that they're going to pay to send someone to an OEM class, and they're going to be able to take someone off the street and make them 80% applied without the callbacks of learning on the job and the slippage of learning on the job by week 4? If that's of interest to them, if they like profit, if they like, being able to work through their backlog and revenue it, if they enjoy not getting callbacks and not becoming tech support for their junior technicians, that's the world we can provide. That's the future we can provide for them through our courses.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's Phil. That's all. Those are all the questions I have.
Sure.
And I tell you, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here, and I'm really glad that you and I got the opportunity to chat more. And I think it's been great having you here, and I'd love to have you on some more, and not just talk about training, but like even some of those even some of those kind of out there topics. Maybe we'll do an episode of kind of like, it's like where some people like take drugs and then all of a sudden like they feel like they have like this just like
Hiawatha experience.
Yeah, exactly. So I would love to have you back at some point.
some what if episodes.
Yep, I think so.
Yeah. There's the Y files on YouTube, and they go through some crazy. It's like a talking goldfish and his friend, and they go through like these crazy scenarios. At the end of the day, this is just the world according to me. I do know our training's effective. I do know we've cracked the nut on that, but everything else, I told you all my predictions, they've been off. My gut tells me something's there about the AI and the robotics. I just don't know the time frame. So yeah, I wouldn't go make any stock picks based on me.
We won't hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Okay.
You said it was a sure bet.
Yeah, there you go. It was a sure bet like 2 years ago. Buy NVIDIA.
And it is NVIDIA, by the way, who is doing that you mentioned. So I was taking a look at that. I know NVIDIA. I know that there's a video out there somewhere where someone actually it's for a program object where someone used NVIDIA's AI to, I guess, give them Java code for something, and then they showed people how to apply that to a Niagara program object instead.
Did you see my video where I took a sequence of operations, put it in ChatGPT 4.0, and asked it to write the Siemens PPCL?
No, I have not. I will have to check that one out.
Yeah, I think it was like episode like 450 or something. I went into ChatGPT and threw a SOP, and yeah.
All right, I will. All right, I'm gonna check that out later on this weekend.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Okay. Well, that's all I have, and thank you very much, Phil, for coming on today and taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to two lowly guys like us. So,
really
don't say that. No. Seriously, like don't. I hear people say that kind of stuff, and it's like, no. If you guys had any clue how many things I've messed up just through the choices I've made. I mean, I took out a freaking database on an entire hospital and had to overnight controllers to it. So. I've just made up maybe more mistakes than you all. I don't know. So, but no,
that's a big part of learning too, right? Making mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
And then
you all already sound better than my first podcast did. Like my first podcast was like, "Hi, it's Phil Zito. I'm too unconfident to actually speak on this episode, but I'm going to try." So, I mean, yeah.
I would love.
Go ahead.
I would love to reiterate. Charles, thanking you for joining us tonight. I think a big area way for everybody and anybody that hopefully listens to the podcast is that conversations like these are a big part of the learning process. And we all help each other by dropping ecos and honestly talking about things to give us those insights and ideas of where to go next. So I think it's fantastic that you've given me plenty of things to think about just in this conversation here.
Once again, thank you, Phil, for joining us to talk about SBA. That's all we have for this episode. And remember to stay curious and never stop learning. Until next time, I'm Charles.
And I'm Matthew.
And this has been It's a Controls Problem.
Hi, it's Phil Zito.